Hello and welcome to the quiet hours and to the empty spaces on the map, the places where people, ships, entire planes simply stepped off the edge of the known world. Tonight, we begin a long journey, a deep, slow exploration into the most profound silences in human history. These are not just stories about the missing. They are stories about the void they left behind, fractures in reality that have never healed. Before we settle in, if you find comfort in these deep dives into the mysterious and the historical, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. But only if this is the kind of content that truly resonates with you. It genuinely helps make these long-form explorations possible, and I'm always genuinely curious. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's fascinating to feel this community, scattered across the globe, coming together in the dark. Now find a comfortable position, dim your lights, let the world outside fade away, and let's begin our descent into the first and perhaps most famous of all maritime mysteries. Case 1, the Mary Celeste, the ghost ship paradigm. Our journey begins not with a person, but with a ship. And not just any ship, a symbol. A perfect, pristine, and utterly empty question mark, found adrift in the vast, blue emptiness of the Atlantic Ocean. It was December 5th, 1872. The Canadian merchant ship Dei Gratia was cutting through the calm waters of the Azores. On the horizon, they spotted a brigantine sailing erratically, her sails slightly torn, but not in a state of wreckage. As they drew closer, they identified her, the Mary Celeste. She was a month out of New York, bound for Genoa, Italy, with a cargo of denatured alcohol. Captain Morehouse of the Dei Gratia knew the Mary Celeste's captain, Benjamin Briggs. He was a seasoned, competent, and deeply religious man. This erratic sailing was wrong. The Dei Gratia signaled. No response. They called out. Only silence answered. A boarding party was sent over. What they found aboard the Mary Celeste would become the template for every ghost ship story ever told, and a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. The ship was seaworthy, perfectly seaworthy. There was a 6-month supply of food and water in the stores. The crew's personal belongings were still in their quarters, untouched. In the captain's cabin, his navigational instruments and charts were laid out. The logbook was there, the last entry mundane, dated 10 days prior. In the galley, a meal was set out on the table, as if someone was about to sit down to eat. But there was no one, not a soul. The 10 people who had been on board, Captain Briggs, his wife, his 2-year-old daughter, and a crew of 7 experienced sailors were gone. Vanished. The lifeboat was missing, suggesting a deliberate, if frantic, abandonment. But why? Why would a seasoned captain, a family man, and his entire crew abandon a perfectly sound, well-provisioned ship in the middle of the ocean? What could have been so terrifying, so immediately threatening, that they would willingly take their chances in a small lifeboat on the open sea, a decision that was, statistically, a death sentence. The official inquiry at the time was inconclusive. It had to be. The clues were all there, but they pointed to nothing definitive. Over the years, theories have multiplied, each one trying to plug the terrifying void at the heart of the story. Perhaps the most plausible theory involves the cargo. The Mary Celeste was carrying 1,700 barrels of denatured alcohol. If some of the barrels had leaked, fumes could have built up in the hold. A fear of an imminent, catastrophic explosion, a fear that turned to panic, might have caused Captain Briggs to issue the order to abandon ship immediately. Perhaps they launched the lifeboat, tethered it to the Mary Celeste, and waited at a safe distance. And then a squall, a rogue wave, or simply a snapped line swept the lifeboat away, dooming them, while the Mary Celeste stubbornly remained afloat, the explosion never coming. Other theories are more fanciful. Piracy, though nothing was stolen. A sea monster, a kraken from the deep, alien abduction. But the truth is likely more mundane, and in its mundanity, more horrifying. It was likely a cascade of small events, a perfect storm of misjudgment and fear. A single, collective, fatal mistake. The Mary Celeste was eventually sailed to Gibraltar, and later had a long, unlucky career under other owners before being deliberately wrecked for insurance money. But her name and the image of that empty, waiting ship, sailing herself through a calm sea, is immortal. She is the archetypal ghost ship, a vessel that asks us a question we can never answer. What does it feel like to be so afraid that you choose almost certain death over what you have? She is a lesson in the psychology of terror, played out on the world's largest and most indifferent stage. Case 2, the vanishing of Flight 19, the birth of a legend. If the Mary Celeste gave us the ghost ship, then this next disappearance gave us a phrase, a myth that has captivated the world for generations, the Bermuda Triangle. And it all began on a clear, sunny afternoon, December 5th, 1945, exactly 73 years to the day after the Mary Celeste was found. The setting is the U.S. Navy's training base at Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The players, 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers, known as Flight 19. These were massive, powerful aircraft, each with a crew of 3, a pilot and 2 airmen. The mission was a routine 3-hour navigation and bombing run over the Atlantic. The leader was an experienced flight instructor, Lieutenant Charles Taylor. He had over 2,500 hours of flight time. The students were seasoned, having completed hundreds of hours themselves. This was a milk run. They took off at 2:10 p.m. The weather was perfect. The flight was to head east, conduct a bombing run on the Hens and Chickens shoals, then continue east, north, and finally swing back west to return to base. A simple, triangular route. About an hour and a half into the flight, something went terribly wrong. The first radio transmission from Lieutenant Taylor was confused. "Both my compasses are out," he reported to the base. "I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale. I'm over land, but it's broken. I'm sure I'm in the Keys, but I don't know how far down." This was the first critical error. If he was over the Florida Keys, he was hundreds of miles off course. The flight controller, hearing this, knew it was impossible. He tried to guide Taylor, but Taylor was adamant. His compasses had failed. He couldn't trust his instruments. He was lost. What followed was a series of increasingly frantic radio transmissions. A slow-motion audio drama of a group of men realizing they are hopelessly disoriented. The other pilots in the flight can be heard, their voices tight with confusion. They argue about which way is west. The sun is setting. At one point, Taylor is heard to say, "We cannot be sure of any direction. Everything is wrong. Even the ocean doesn't look as it should." That single sentence has fueled decades of speculation. What does that mean? What did they see or not see? The last clear transmission from Flight 19 was at 6:20 p.m. "All planes close up tight. We'll have to ditch unless landfall. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we all go down together." Then silence. The U.S. Navy immediately launched a massive search and rescue operation. One of the rescue aircraft, a PBM Mariner flying boat, a plane nicknamed the Flying Gas Tank for its volatile fuel, took off with a crew of 13. 23 minutes after its last radio check, it vanished completely. A ship in the area reported seeing a burst of flame and an oil slick on the water. The Mariner and its 13 crewmen were also gone. The official Navy investigation was massive. It concluded that Lieutenant Taylor had mistakenly believed he was over the Florida Keys when he was actually far out over the Atlantic. This initial disorientation, combined with the failure of his compasses, likely due to pilot error or equipment malfunction, led him to lead his flight further out to sea. They simply flew until they ran out of fuel, but the report also contained a strange, almost poetic admission. The Board of Inquiry arrived at the opinion that the flight leader was not at fault, as he was the victim of a strange and puzzling phenomenon. That strange and puzzling phenomenon was left undefined. It was a bureaucratic shrug. It was the birth of the Bermuda Triangle legend. The complete disappearance of 5 large aircraft and a rescue plane, with 27 men without a single piece of conclusive wreckage, was too much for the rational mind to accept. It demanded a myth. It demanded a place on the map where the normal rules of physics and navigation no longer applied. Flight 19 didn't just vanish, it created a monster, a geographic phantom that haunts our imagination to this day. They are forever flying, lost in that strange and puzzling twilight, their fuel gauges ticking down toward zero. Case 3, the lost colony of Roanoke, the vanishing seed of America. We now travel further back to the very dawn of English America, to a mystery that is not just about people, but about the dream of a new world itself. This is the story of the Lost Colony, a foundational American ghost story. The year is 1587. Queen Elizabeth is on the throne, and England is desperate to catch up with the Spanish Empire in the race for the New World. A group of 115 settlers, men, women, and children, led by the artist and Governor John White, land on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. Among them is White's own daughter, Eleanor, and her husband, Ananias Dare. Just days after their arrival, Eleanor gives birth to a baby girl. She is named Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. The colony, however, is precarious. They have arrived too late in the season to plant crops. Relations with the local Secotan tribe are tense. Governor White, realizing the dire need for supplies, is persuaded to sail back to England, leaving his family and the colonists behind. It is meant to be a quick trip. He promises to return within a year. Fate and the Spanish Armada intervene. England goes to war with Spain, and every seaworthy ship is commandeered for the defense of the realm. White is trapped. For 3 agonizing years, he tries to get back to Roanoke. He finally lands on August 18th, 1590, his granddaughter's 3rd birthday. As his boat approaches the shore, he sees no signs of life. No smoke from cook fires. No one on the beach to greet them. The settlement is deserted. The houses have been carefully dismantled, not destroyed, but taken down in an orderly fashion. There are no signs of a struggle. No graves. It is a ghost town. The only clues are 2 cryptic carvings. On a post of the fort, the word Croatoan is carved in capital letters. On a tree, the letters CRO. This was a prearranged signal. The colonists had agreed that if they had to relocate, they would carve the name of their destination. And if they were in distress, they were to carve a Maltese cross above it. There was no cross. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, modern-day Hatteras Island, and the tribe of Native Americans who lived there, who were known to be friendly. A storm was brewing. White's men refused to sail to Croatoan to investigate. They had to return to their ship and flee the worsening weather. John White never saw his family again. He died years later, never knowing their fate. So what happened to the 115 colonists? The leading historical theory is integration. Facing starvation and hardship, they likely split into smaller groups and were absorbed into the Croatoan tribe or other Algonquian communities further inland. Later reports from Jamestown settlers, decades later, spoke of encounters with native people who had gray eyes, spoke English, and lived in European-style houses. But no definitive archaeological evidence has ever been found to confirm this. Other theories are darker. They were wiped out by disease, or a Spanish attack from Florida, or a conflict with a hostile tribe. But the lack of bodies or evidence of violence points away from a massacre. The mystery of the lost colony is the mystery of a severed root. It is the what if at the very beginning of American history. These were not just settlers, they were a seed. And that seed was planted, and then it simply dissolved into the soil, leaving behind a single haunting word, Croatoan, a name that is both a clue and a taunt. They didn't just disappear, they were absorbed by the immense, unknown continent, becoming one with the very land they had come to conquer. Case 4. The disappearance of the Beaumont children, the sunlight vanishing. Not all disappearances happen in the stormy Atlantic or the deep wilderness. Some happen in broad daylight, in a place of safety and laughter. And that is what makes them uniquely terrifying. This is the story that shattered a nation's innocence. January 26, 1966. Australia Day, a national holiday. The beach at Glenelg near Adelaide is crowded with families. It is a perfect summer day. Jane Beaumont, age 9, her sister Arna, age 7, and their brother Grant, age 4, ask their parents if they can take the short bus ride from their home to the beach. It's a trip they've made before. The beach is only 5 minutes away. Their mother, Nancy, agrees, giving them money for bus fare and lunch. She expects them home by 2:00 p.m. They are seen throughout the morning, playing near the water, buying a meat pie for lunch. They are happy, normal children. At 3:00 p.m., they are not home. Nancy Beaumont is not overly worried. Buses can be unreliable. By 4:00 p.m., she is concerned. By nightfall, she is frantic. The police are called. What follows is one of the largest police investigations in Australian history. The entire country holds its breath. Witnesses come forward. A man was seen playing with the children on the beach. A tall, blonde, sun-tanned man in blue swimming trunks. He seemed friendly. The children seemed comfortable with him. This is the last credible sighting. The investigation hits dead end after dead end. A massive dredging of the nearby sandhills yields nothing. Psychics are consulted. Thousands of leads are followed. All go nowhere. The case of the Beaumont children is a parent's worst nightmare crystallized. It is the violation of the ordinary. It wasn't a remote forest or a stormy sea. It was a crowded beach on a sunny day. The image of those three bright, smiling faces, Jane with her blonde hair, Arna with her glasses, Grant with his cheeky grin, was seared into the national conscience. It changed Australia. It made parents fearful. It ended an era of post-war trust. The leading theory is abduction by a predatory individual, likely the tall, blonde man. But without bodies, without a crime scene, without a single piece of physical evidence, the case remains frozen in time. It is a snapshot of a perfect day that turned into an endless night for a family and for a country. The Beaumont children did not vanish into the shadows. They vanished from the light, and the shadow they cast has never lifted. Case 5. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse Keepers. The silence of the storm. Now we travel to the edge of the world, to a place where the wind doesn't just blow, it screams. A collection of brutal, rocky crags in the North Atlantic, known as the Flannan Isles. In December of 1900, this was the most isolated posting imaginable for 3 lighthouse keepers: Thomas Marshall, James Duckett, and Donald MacArthur. Their job was simple: keep the light burning, maintain the beacon that warned ships away from the treacherous coastline. A supply ship, the Prosperous, was due for a routine visit just before Christmas, but stormy weather delayed it. It wasn't until December 26th that the ship could approach the island. As it drew near, the crew noticed something immediately wrong. The lighthouse was dark. No flags were raised to signal their arrival. An eerie, profound silence hung over the island. A landing party made its way up the steep, slippery path to the lighthouse. The main gate and the heavy lighthouse door were both unlocked. Inside, they found a scene of suspended animation, a snapshot of life interrupted. The clock on the wall had stopped. The fire in the grate was long dead and cold. In the kitchen, a chair was lying overturned on the floor. The keeper's logbook was there, with entries up to December 15th. The final entries, written by Thomas Marshall, described storms of biblical fury, winds that screamed like a gale, storms that the keepers themselves were praying would abate. But here was the first chilling discrepancy. Meteorological records from the nearby island of Lewis showed calm, clear weather for that period. The official investigation concluded that the keepers had been swept away by a massive freak wave. The theory goes that one keeper, perhaps Marshall, was outside on the western platform, a spot 100 feet above sea level, but vulnerable to once-in-a-century waves, and was taken by the sea. The second, seeing this, rushed to help and was also swallowed. The third, in a desperate, doomed rescue attempt, met the same fate. But this theory is fragile, full of holes. All 3 men were seasoned mariners. They understood the raw, murderous power of the ocean. They were unlikely to all put themselves in such mortal danger simultaneously. Furthermore, 2 sets of oilskins, the heavy, waterproof gear essential for going outside in a storm, were found hanging inside the lighthouse, suggesting not all of them were prepared to face the elements. The overturned chair suggests a sudden, startled reaction. But to what? The mystery of the Flannan Isles has spawned darker theories. A fight that led to murder and a cover-up suicide. A shared, sudden madness brought on by isolation, a folie à trois. Or something more supernatural, whispered in the pubs of the Scottish Isles, that the men were taken not by the sea, but by something that dwells within it. The truth is, the silence was the only witness. The lighthouse still stands, not just as a beacon of warning, but as a monument to a question that has echoed across the waves for over a century. What kind of fear, what kind of impulse makes 3 experienced men walk voluntarily into the mouth of a raging storm? Case 6, the disappearance of Frederick Valentich, the sky above. We now journey from the cold sea to the warm seas above the Bass Strait, south of Australia. The date is October 21st, 1978. A young, ambitious pilot named Frederick Valentich, aged 20, is on a training flight in a single-engine Cessna 182. The night is clear, the visibility perfect. He's flying from Melbourne to King Island, a routine trip. About halfway through his journey, Valentich contacts air traffic control in Melbourne. His voice is calm, curious. He reports a strange aircraft following him at about 4,500 feet. The controller, Steve Roby, checks his radar. There is nothing. No other aircraft in the vicinity. Valentich's descriptions become increasingly specific and unnerving. He describes the object as long, metallic, with a green light and shiny. It was, he stated clearly, not an aircraft. It passed over him, he said, then began to orbit him. His voice, initially curious, becomes laced with a building panic. It's hovering, he says, and it's not an aircraft. Then his final, chilling words. Delta Sierra, Juliet, his aircraft's call sign. Melbourne, that strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again. It is hovering, and it's not an aircraft. This is followed by 17 seconds of a loud, metallic, scraping or grinding sound. A noise that sounds less like an impact and more like interference, like something being dragged across the microphone. Then absolute, unbroken silence. A massive sea and air search was launched, covering thousands of square miles. Not a single piece of wreckage was ever found. No oil slick, no body, no life jacket. The official investigation by the Australian Department of Transport was thorough. It suggested that Valentich, a known UFO enthusiast, likely became disoriented while flying at night over water, a phenomenon known as spatial disorientation. The report posits that he may have inadvertently flown his plane upside down, and the lights he saw were merely the reflection of his own plane's lights on the water's surface, or the planets Venus and Mars, which were particularly bright that night. The final metallic sound was the impact with the water, yet this explanation feels deeply unsatisfying. The clarity and consistency of his radio transmissions, his specific, real-time descriptions of the object's impossible maneuvers, and the total lack of any physical evidence have fueled decades of speculation. Did Frederick Valentich have a tragic encounter with his own mind, a psychological perfect storm? Or was his a genuine, terrifying encounter with an unidentified aerial phenomenon that ended with his abduction or his destruction? The case remains one of the most well-documented and compelling in the annals of aerial mystery. A conversation between a young man and the void, ending in a scream of static. Case 7, the Springfield 3, the violation of the ordinary. This case is a modern American nightmare. It's a violation of the ordinary, a crime that defies all logic and leaves a community forever haunted. The date is June 7th, 1992. The place, Springfield, Missouri. 3 women vanish from a home on East Delmer Street. They are Cheryl Levitt, her 19-year-old daughter Susan Streeter, and Susan's friend, Stacy McCall, who had just graduated from high school the night before. After a night of celebration, the three women ended up at the Levitt home. The following morning, friends arrived to find the house silent. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was in a state of peaceful disarray, exactly as one would expect after a late night. Purses were lined up on the living room floor. Car keys were present. Cigarettes and money were left behind. There was, however, one anomaly. A broken glass porch light globe was lying on the porch, as if it had been unscrewed or knocked loose. There were no signs of a struggle. No forced entry. No blood. It was as if the three women had simply dematerialized into the humid morning air. The investigation was massive and immediate, but it led to a series of frustrating dead ends. A potential witness reported seeing a van parked near the house late that night. There were reports of mysterious, heavy-breather phone calls to friends afterward. Yet, no credible suspects were ever firmly identified. No arrests ever made. The sheer improbability of the crime is what makes it so baffling. How does one, let alone three people including two adults, get abducted from a residential neighborhood, from inside a home, without a single neighbor hearing a scream, a struggle, or a car door slamming? The case defies all standard criminal profiles. The broken porch light suggests a possible ploy to lure someone outside, but to what end? The leading theories range from a targeted attack by someone they knew, perhaps stemming from a conflict at the graduation party, to a random, opportunistic attack by a serial killer. But without a crime scene, without bodies, without a single piece of conclusive forensic evidence, the case remains frozen in time, a wound that will not close. The Springfield Three represent a profound and terrifying mystery, a reminder that safety is fragile, and that darkness can descend upon the most ordinary of lives, in the most ordinary of places, without warning or explanation. Case 8, D.B. Cooper, the skyjacker who vanished into legend. This is the one disappearance that became a legend. A folk hero's tale of audacity and escape. The date, November 24th, 1971. The place, Portland, Oregon. A man who identified himself as Dan Cooper purchased a one-way ticket on Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, bound for Seattle. He was quiet, wearing a business suit and a narrow black tie. He wore sunglasses. Once airborne, he handed a note to a flight attendant. It claimed he had a bomb in his briefcase. His demands were simple: $200,000 in cash, nearly $1.5 million today, and 4 parachutes. Upon landing in Seattle, he released the 36 passengers in exchange for the ransom and the parachutes. The plane took off again, with Cooper and the crew aboard, now heading for Mexico City. Somewhere over the rugged, wooded terrain of southwestern Washington, in the midst of a rainstorm, Cooper did the unthinkable. He lowered the rear air stair of the Boeing 727 and jumped into the night, into the storm, and into infamy. Despite one of the largest and most expensive manhunts in FBI history. No trace of him was found for years. The official theory was that he could not have survived the jump. The conditions were terrible. He was jumping into a wilderness in the dead of night, wearing a business suit and loafers. Then, in 1980, a boy digging on a beach along the Columbia River unearthed a rotting package. It contained $5,800 of the ransom money, its serial numbers a perfect match. But of Cooper himself, not a shred of evidence. No parachute, no suit, no body. The FBI officially closed the case in 2016, citing the likelihood that Cooper did not survive. But the legend persists. Was he a master criminal who pulled off the perfect crime and lived to enjoy his riches? Was he a skilled skydiver, a disgruntled military vet who planned every detail and melted back into society? The image of Dan Cooper, a calm, ordinary man who stared down the system, stepped out into the void, and got away with it, is powerfully seductive. He is the ultimate American anti-hero. The case of D.B. Cooper remains the ultimate cold case, a story of a man who vanished from the sky with a fortune and became a ghost, a name whispered in bars and conspiracy theories, forever floating in the stormy darkness between failure and success. Case 9, the SS Marine Sulphur Queen. The triangle claims a giant. This disappearance added a major piece of tangible evidence to the growing legend of the Bermuda Triangle. In February 1963, the SS Marine Sulphur Queen, a massive T-2 tanker converted to carry molten sulfur, was sailing from Beaumont, Texas, to Norfolk, Virginia. It was a behemoth, 523 feet long, with a crew of 39 experienced men. The last known radio contact was routine. Then, the ship and its crew vanished completely. A massive air and sea search was launched, covering 348,000 square miles. The only traces ever found were a few life preservers and a single, solitary life jacket. No debris field, no oil slick, no floating cargo. The official U.S. Coast Guard report was extensive, but ultimately inconclusive. It strongly suggested the vessel likely suffered a catastrophic structural failure. The ship's conversion from an oil tanker to a sulfur carrier was a key factor. The continuous, high heat from the molten sulfur made the steel of the hull brittle, a phenomenon known as hot shortness. A crack could have developed, releasing the 15,000-ton load of molten sulfur. Upon contact with water, this would have caused a massive, ship-shattering explosion. The vessel would have sunk so rapidly that no distress call could be sent. This is the most logical and widely accepted explanation. A simple, tragic maritime accident. However, the lack of any significant debris field, a problem that would eerily foreshadow the loss of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 over half a century later, has kept more speculative theories alive. The fact that this modern 500-foot ship disappeared without a single clear trace in the calm waters of the infamous Bermuda Triangle ensures its place as one of the sea's great and most tragic mysteries. The marine sulfur queen didn't just sink, it was consumed, absorbed by the very myth of the triangle, becoming another data point in an argument about a place that may not even exist. Case 10, the Star Tiger and Star Ariel, the twin ghosts of the Atlantic. These are not one, but two separate, nearly identical disappearances that cemented the Bermuda Triangle as a household name and a place of genuine dread. They are the twin ghosts of the Atlantic. The Avro Tudor IV aircraft, named Star Tiger, vanished on January 30th, 1948, on a flight from the Azores to Bermuda with 31 people on board. The flight's last communication was routine, reporting expected arrival on time. It never arrived. A massive search found no wreckage. The official investigation concluded with chilling frankness. It may truly be said that no more baffling problem has ever been presented for investigation. What happened in this case will never be known, and the fate of the Star Tiger must remain an unsolved mystery. Exactly 11 months later, on January 17th, 1949, the Star Ariel, another Avro Tudor IV, vanished on a flight from Bermuda to Kingston, Jamaica. Its last message was a routine position report. Then silence. Again, no wreckage, no bodies, no explanation. The official reports for both flights could only speculate catastrophic mechanical failure, navigational error leading to fuel exhaustion, or some unknown external cause. The lack of any mayday calls from either flight is particularly telling, suggesting a sudden, catastrophic event that gave the crews no time to react. The twin disasters, so similar and so utterly inexplicable, suggested a pattern, a lethal flaw either in the aircraft themselves. The Avro Tudor had a questionable safety record, or in that specific patch of the Atlantic. These two cases represent the absolute pinnacle of aviation mystery from that era, where not a single clue was left behind to guide the investigation. They weren't just lost, they were erased, their silence speaking volumes about the immense, indifferent power of the ocean and the sky. Case 11, the vanishing of the Anjikuni village, the echo of an empty town. We now venture into a story that straddles the line between documented fact and enduring legend, a tale that speaks to our most primal fear, the fear of a community, an entire world, simply ceasing to exist. This is the story of the Anjikuni village. As the story goes, in the winter of 1930, a Canadian fur trapper named Joe Labelle, a man familiar with the harsh rhythms of the Arctic, arrived at a small Inuit village on the banks of Lake Anjikuni in Canada's Northwest Territories. This was a settlement he had visited many times before, a community of about 25 to 30 people. But this time, as he approached, he was met with a silence so profound it felt like a physical blow. There were no sounds of children playing, no dogs barking, no smoke rising from the igloos. The village was completely, utterly deserted. Labelle entered the encampment, his calls echoing unanswered. What he found was a scene of eerie preservation and inexplicable absence. In the igloos, sealskin coats and fur-lined boots were left behind, essential for survival in the brutal cold. Rifles, the most vital tool for hunting and protection, leaned against walls. Cooking pots still hung over cold fire pits, with remnants of caribou stew frozen solid inside. It was as if the entire population had been whisked away in the middle of their daily routines. But the details grew stranger, more chilling. Labelle reported that the community's sled dogs were found, all of them tethered to trees. They had starved to death, their bodies frozen and partially eaten by other animals. This was perhaps the most telling clue. No Inuit would ever abandon their dogs, the very lifeline of their existence. Most horrifying of all, Labelle claimed to have found a grave. An ancient burial site had been opened, the stones carefully removed, and the body that had lain inside was gone. The story was popularized by author Frank Edwards in his 1959 book, Stranger Than Science, and it was said to have been investigated by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who reportedly found the village deserted, but attributed it to the nomadic habits of the Inuit. However, skeptics have largely debunked the tale. No village of that name appears on official maps or in RCMP records from the era. The details align more with an urban legend, a conflation of several different incidents and campfire stories. Yet the legend persists with terrifying power. Whether it is a complete fabrication, a gross exaggeration, or a kernel of a stranger truth, the story of the Anjikuni village serves as the ultimate expression of our fear of collective vanishing. It's not just the disappearance of individuals, but the erasure of a society. It suggests a force so overwhelming, so incomprehensible, that it can silence the laughter of children, still the hands of cooks, and empty an entire corner of the world, leaving behind only the ghost of a community and a mystery that the frozen North has kept for nearly a century. Case 12, the lost army of Cambyses, the sandstorm that swallowed 50,000 men. We travel now from the frozen Arctic to the blistering, unforgiving sands of the Egyptian Sahara. This is a disappearance lost to antiquity, a story relayed by the Greek historian Herodotus, and one that has tantalized archaeologists for centuries. It is the story of the lost army of Cambyses. In 525 BC, the powerful Persian emperor Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great, was the master of a vast empire. He had just conquered Egypt, but to the west, in the Siwa oasis, lay the temple of Amun and its oracle, which held immense religious and political influence. Cambyses sent an army. Herodotus tells us it was 50,000 strong from the city of Thebes to march across the desert, subdue the oasis, and destroy the temple. This was not a small raiding party. This was a massive, organized military force. Infantry, cavalry, supply trains, and all the support personnel needed to sustain such a host. They marched into the Great Sand Sea, a vast ocean of dunes known today as the most arid place on Earth. They were never seen again. Not a single soldier, not a piece of equipment, not a scrap of clothing. The entire army, one of the most powerful military units of its age, vanished into the desert as completely as a drop of water on hot sand. Herodotus, writing decades later, claimed that a massive, cataclysmic sandstorm rose up and buried them all. A calm scene of biblical proportions, a wall of wind and sand that suffocated and entombed 50,000 men in a single, furious event. For over 2 millennia, this was considered a legend, a fanciful tale by the father of history, who was also known to be the father of lies. But in the last few decades, the story has been re-evaluated. The desert is a perfect preserver. Could the evidence still be out there? In 2000, a team of geologists and archaeologists, led by the twin brothers Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione, announced a staggering discovery. In the remote and hyper-arid region of the Gilf Kebir Plateau, near the Libyan border, they claimed to have found a mass grave of sorts. They reported finding hundreds of bleached human bones, ancient Persian weaponry, including bronze daggers and arrowheads, a horse bit, and silver bracelets, all dating to the Achaemenid Persian period. They believed they had found the remnants of Cambyses' lost army. The discovery was, and remains, highly controversial. Many mainstream Egyptologists are deeply skeptical, citing a lack of peer-reviewed publication and the brothers' history with sensationalist finds. No large-scale, definitive excavation has confirmed their claims, so the mystery endures. Did a sandstorm of almost supernatural violence truly swallow an army whole? Did they become disoriented and perish of thirst, their bodies scattered and buried by the shifting dunes over centuries? Or does the truth lie in the Castiglione's findings, waiting for the desert to finally yield its most colossal secret? The lost army of Cambyses is the ultimate historical ghost story. It is the terrifying possibility that the earth itself can open its mouth and consume legions, leaving no history behind but a whisper on the wind. Case 13. The disappearance of the USS Cyclops, the titanic vanishing of the Great War. This is the single largest loss of life in U.S. naval history, not directly involving combat, and it remains one of the most gaping voids in the annals of the sea. The story of the USS Cyclops is so massive, so complete, it feels less like a tragedy and more like an act of erasure. The Cyclops was a colossal vessel for her time, a 542-foot-long Navy collier, a floating coal depot designed to fuel the American fleet. In March 1918, with the First World War raging, She was laden with a cargo of manganese ore in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and set sail for Baltimore, Maryland. On board were 309 souls, crew and passengers. The ship was last seen departing the island of Barbados on March 4th. She was never heard from again. No distress call, no radio signal, nothing. President Woodrow Wilson would later say, "Only God and the sea know what happened to the great ship." A massive search found nothing. Not a lifebelt, not a piece of wreckage, not a single body. A ship the length of 2 city blocks, with 309 people aboard, had been utterly and completely wiped from the face of the ocean. Theories abound, but none are satisfying. The most logical points to the cargo. Manganese ore is dense and heavy. If it shifted suddenly in a storm, it could have caused the ship to capsize and sink with terrifying speed, giving no one time to radio for help. Others have pointed to structural failure. The Cyclops had a history of problems with her hull, but the sheer scale of the disappearance breeds darker speculation. The captain, George W. Worley, was of German descent, and there were rumors, never proven, of mutiny, or even that he deliberately delivered the ship to a German raider or U-boat. The official Navy conclusion was simply unknown causes. The loss of the Cyclops is a black hole in maritime history. It is a reminder that the ocean's power is absolute, and that it can demand a sacrifice of such magnitude that it defies human comprehension. The ship and its 309 souls are not just lost, they are a permanent absence, a silence that echoes from the depths of the Bermuda Triangle, a monument to the fact that sometimes the sea does not give up its dead because it does not even leave a trace that they were ever there. Case 14. The bizarre vanishing of Lars Mittank. The sprint into madness. This is a modern disappearance, one captured in part on the cold, unblinking eye of CCTV. It plays out not as a slow-motion tragedy, but as a sudden, violent fracture in a young man's mind. This is the story of Lars Mittank, and it is a digital age nightmare. In July 2014, Lars Mittank, a 28-year-old German man, was on vacation in Golden Sands, Bulgaria, with his friends. The trip took a turn when he was involved in a minor physical altercation at a football stadium. He saw a doctor who prescribed him antibiotics for a minor eardrum injury and advised him not to fly. His friends left without him. The day they departed, Lars' behavior spiraled. He called his mother, whispering that he was being followed by 4 or 5 men, and that he no longer trusted anyone. His paranoia was acute and terrifying. He abruptly checked out of his hotel and went to the Varna airport, hoping to catch a different flight home. What happens next is preserved in chilling detail on the airport's security cameras. Lars is seen at the check-in desk. He appears agitated, constantly looking over his shoulder, his movements jerky and fearful. He is a man consumed by a terror that only he can see. Suddenly, without warning, he grabs his backpack and bolts. He sprints out of the terminal, a across a busy multi-lane road, vaults a high fence, and disappears into the dense, sprawling forest adjacent to the airport. He was never seen again. Extensive searches of the forest and surrounding area found nothing. No body, no clothing, no trace. His passport, phone, and belongings were left in his backpack at the airport. The most plausible theory is that the antibiotics, specifically cefuroxime acetyl, caused a rare but severe psychotic reaction, a known side effect. This, combined with the stress of his injury and being alone in a foreign country, could have triggered an acute paranoid breakdown. However, his family disputes this, and the sheer visceral terror evident in his flight raises other, more unsettling questions. Was his paranoia a symptom of psychosis? Or was it a rational response to a genuine, unseen threat? The image of Lars Mittank sprinting in sheer, unadulterated terror into the woods is a modern-day ghost story. It is a mystery that is as brief as it is utterly and profoundly baffling, a reminder that the most impenetrable wilderness can sometimes be the human mind itself. Case 15. The fate of the SS Warretta, the Titanic of the South. Dubbed the Titanic of the South, the SS Warretta was a state-of-the-art, 500-foot passenger liner, a symbol of luxury and modern engineering. In 1909, on only her second voyage, she was sailing from Durban, South Africa, to Cape Town with 211 passengers and crew. She was a floating palace, equipped with the latest amenities, deemed perfectly seaworthy. Another ship, the Harlow, reported passing the Warretta in a storm. That was the last confirmed sighting. The Warretta simply never arrived in Cape Town. Despite extensive searches, no wreckage, no lifeboats, no bodies from the Warretta were ever found. A ship of that size and construction does not simply dissolve. The official inquiry concluded the ship likely capsized and sank suddenly in a severe storm, a theory supported by some pre-voyage concerns about her stability from a passenger on the maiden voyage, but the absolute lack of any debris, a problem that would eerily foreshadow the loss of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 over a century later, has kept the mystery alive and burning in the hearts of maritime historians. The Warretta was carrying a number of prominent and wealthy passengers, and the public outcry was immense. Multiple potential wreck sites have been investigated over the decades, but none have been conclusively identified as the Warretta. Her disappearance shattered public confidence in passenger travel and remains one of the great maritime ghosts. The Warretta is a vessel that sailed over the horizon and into the realm of pure, enduring myth. She is a reminder that the Southern Ocean is as vast and mysterious as any, and that the line between an unsinkable ship and a forgotten one is terrifyingly thin. Case 16. The Sodder Children, the Fire That Didn't Consume. This disappearance is a personal, familial tragedy that burns with the heat of a fire and the coldness of a potential cover-up. On Christmas Eve, 1945, in Fayetteville, West Virginia, The Sodder family home burst into flames. George and Jenny Sodder, along with 4 of their 9 children, managed to escape the inferno. But 5 children, Morris, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were trapped inside, or so it was believed. The fire was intense, but the next day, the rubble yielded a horrifying anomaly. No bones, no dental remains, nothing that could be identified as the children. The fire chief insisted the coal-fired hot water heater in the basement had generated enough heat to cremate the bodies completely, a notion that forensic experts have since called virtually impossible. The Sodder family, however, refused to believe their children were dead. They uncovered a cascade of bizarre details in the days and weeks that followed. A strange man had called the house earlier asking for someone who didn't live there. The telephone line was cut. A ladder that was always propped against the house was mysteriously moved, preventing a rescue. Witnesses came forward claiming to have seen the children in a car that night. George Sodder spent the rest of his life and fortune investigating, even turning the property into a memorial and offering a reward for information. He received a photograph in the mail years later, purportedly of an adult Louis Sodder, but it could never be verified. The case is a haunting cocktail of a tragic accident and a potential kidnapping, possibly motivated by George's outspoken criticism of Mussolini and the local Italian community. It leaves a permanent scar of doubt and a question that can never be laid to rest. Did the children burn, or were they stolen from the flames? The Sodder children represent a different kind of vanishing, one that happens not in the wild, but in the heart of a family, leaving behind a legacy of grief, suspicion, and an ache for answers that fire could not destroy. Case 17. The unexplained absence of Ambrose Bierce. Ambrose Bierce was a famous and acerbic American writer and journalist, known for his cynical wit and his masterpiece, The Devil's Dictionary. In 1913, at the age of 71, he decided to tour the battlefields of the American Civil War and then journey into revolutionary Mexico. He was a man fascinated by death, by the macabre, and by the absurdities of human conflict. His last known communication was a letter dated December 26, 1913, from Chihuahua, Mexico. He wrote, "As to me, I leave here tomorrow for an unknown destination." And then he was gone. He vanished into the chaotic, violent landscape of the Mexican Revolution, a conflict fought by Pancho Villa's rebels and federal troops. Some theorize he was executed by a firing squad. Others believe he joined Villa's army as an observer and was killed in the Battle of Ojinaga. There are more romantic notions that he staged his own disappearance, a final, fitting act for a man so fascinated by death and the ephemeral nature of existence. A writer's ultimate plot twist, but no grave was ever found, no body identified, no credible deathbed confession ever emerged. Ambrose Bierce, a man who wielded words as sharp and precise as surgical tools, simply walked off the edge of the known world, leaving behind a silence more profound and enigmatic than any of his carefully crafted stories. His vanishing was the perfect final sentence to a life dedicated to puncturing human vanity, a sudden, ambiguous end for a man who had written so definitively about it. Case 18. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, The Modern Void. This is the most recent, technologically advanced, and globally baffling disappearance on our list. It is a mystery for the digital age, and it proves that even in an era of total surveillance, the world can still swallow a giant whole. On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, a Boeing 777 carrying 239 people, vanished from air traffic control radar less than an hour after taking off from Kuala Lumpur bound for Beijing. What followed was a mystery that unfolded in real time across the globe. Military radar tracked the plane making a sharp, deliberate turn back over the Malay Peninsula, then flying for hours across the vast, empty expanse of the southern Indian Ocean, far off its intended course, until its satellite data link was finally lost. A massive, multinational search of the southern Indian Ocean, the most expensive in aviation history, was launched. For years, ships and aircraft scoured a remote and treacherous stretch of ocean. They found nothing. Years later, a few confirmed pieces of debris washed up on African shores, offering the only physical proof that the plane had met its end in the water. The main wreckage, the flight data recorders, and the bodies of the 239 people on board have never been found. The official investigation could not determine the cause of the disappearance. The leading theory is a deliberate act by someone on the flight deck, a murder-suicide by the pilot. Other theories include a catastrophic but slow-moving failure, like a fire, that incapacitated the crew, after which the plane flew on autopilot until fuel exhaustion. But the complete lack of a debris field, despite years of searching with the world's most advanced technology, is what makes MH370 so profoundly disturbing and humbling. In our world of smartphones and satellite imaging, a 250-ton aircraft filled with people can still simply disappear. It is a stark reminder that the oceans are deep, the world is vast, and some silences, even now, remain unbroken. MH370 is not a ghost story from the past. It is a chillingly contemporary void. Case 19. The Bennington Triangle, the patch of cursed earth. Vermont's long trail in the Green Mountains is a place of serene beauty. But for a period in the mid-20th century, it was the epicenter of a bizarre and terrifying cluster of vanishings that earned it the name the Bennington Triangle. Between 1945 and 1950, at least 5 people disappeared in this area under strange and often inexplicable circumstances. It began in 1945 with Mitty Rivers, a 74-year-old experienced hunter and guide who vanished without a trace while leading a hunting party. Then, In 1946 came the most famous case. Paula Jean Weldon, an 18-year-old Bennington College student, vanished while hiking the Long Trail. She was seen by several witnesses, then simply vanished into thin air. A massive search found nothing. In 1949, a man named James Tedford vanished from a moving bus full of people. He was there one moment and gone the next, his belongings still on his seat. Then, in 1950, an 8-year-old girl vanished while visiting a farm with her family, her disappearance occurring within sight of her mother. The sheer concentration of unrelated disappearances in a relatively small area, some under seemingly impossible conditions, suggests something far beyond mere coincidence or animal attacks. Was there a highly efficient and elusive serial killer operating with impunity in the post-war years? Or was there some strange geological or atmospheric phenomenon at work, perhaps related to the region's magnetic fields? The Bennington Triangle remains a dark and unsettling blot on the map, a place where the normal rules of reality seemed to temporarily break down, swallowing people without a sound, and leaving behind a legacy of localized dread. Case 20, the lost colony of the Greenland Norse, the end of a civilization. Our final case is the most vast in scale. It is not the disappearance of a ship or a plane, but of an entire civilization. For nearly 500 years, the Norse Vikings thrived in Greenland. They established two main settlements, the eastern and western, with a population that may have peaked at around 5,000 people. They built stone churches, raised livestock, traded ivory from walrus tusks with Europe, and carved out a life in a harsh but manageable environment. Then, in the late 15th century, they vanished. When European ships finally returned to Greenland in the 1500s, they found the settlements completely empty. The houses were intact, but deserted. There were no bodies, no signs of a mass grave, no evidence of a pitched battle. It was as if the entire population had simply left. What happened to the Greenland Norse is one of history's greatest detective stories. The leading theory is a combination of factors. A cooling climate known as the Little Ice Age made farming and pastoral life increasingly difficult. Sea ice increased, disrupting trade routes to Europe, their lifeline for essential goods like iron and timber. They may have faced increasing conflict and competition for resources with the migrating Thule people, the ancestors of the modern Inuit. But the mystery deepens with the question of why they didn't adapt. The Inuit thrived in the same environment. Why did the Norse, a people of renowned resilience, not learn from them? The answer seems to lie in a profound cultural inflexibility. They clung to their European identity, their cattle, their church, their woolen clothing, even as it became maladaptive. They starved, while the sea teemed with fish they refused to eat in sufficient quantities, perhaps due to cultural taboos or a belief that they were above such savage food sources. Their disappearance was a slow-motion vanishing, a centuries-long decline into silence. The last written record is a wedding in a Greenland church in 1408. After that, nothing. The end of the Greenland Norse is a chilling lesson in the collapse of a society. It is a disappearance not caused by a single event, but by a failure to change, a refusal to let go of an old world, even as a new one demanded they adapt. They didn't vanish in a day, they faded away, their final breath lost in the howling Arctic wind, leaving behind only stone ruins, and one of history's most profound and cautionary silences. These 20 stories are but a fraction of the silence. They are echoes in a vast, dark room. The Mary Celeste, Flight 19, the Lost Colony, they are not just historical footnotes. They are permanent questions. They remind us that for all our technology, our maps, our knowledge, the world still holds voids. Voids that can swallow a ship, a plane, an entire community without a trace. These mysteries force us to confront the limits of our understanding. They are the shadow that moves just beyond the firelight. They are the chill in the air on a warm night. They are the reason we look twice at an empty horizon, and perhaps that is their purpose. Not to be solved, but to remind us that the world is still strange, still wide, and still wild. Thank you for joining me on this long journey into the unknown. If this resonated with you, I'll see you in the next one.